Europa Universalis 4. A name you've known for the past 11 years, and a game you've played for just as many. In fact, despite being only my second Paradox game and being an absolute PDX noob when it released, it grew on me like France blobbing all over the map, and I've never truly lost interest. But 11 years later, and with the promise of an entirely new and paradigm-shifting sequel finally on the horizon after an unspeakably number of great expansions, what is EU4 actually like? Is it as great as they say? As great as I say? And if so, why? That's what this video is all about. And if you've never played EU4 before, then don't fret, because this video will deal with most of the game's mechanics and could serve as a good introduction on its own. So if you like this kind of stuff and want to see more, then please consider liking the video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel. It really goes a long way in supporting both me and the channel. And if there are games you're excited for or have been holding off buying, make sure to check out the proud partner of this channel, Instant Gaming. Instant Gaming offers constant discounts on both upcoming, brand new, and old games even when Steam, PlayStation, Xbox, or Nintendo do not. And I love saving on games that are not on sale elsewhere. So if you're missing a Total War game, Age of Empires, Mythology, Paradox games, or just anything else, Instant Gaming most likely has a juicy discount for you. Find the best sales by using my link below, especially if you want to support the channel and the work we do here. Despite the name, Europa Universalis 4 is so much more than just Europe. Hence the name Universalis probably, right? A metric ton of changes have been made to this game over the years, so this video will focus on what Europa Universalis 4 is right now. EU4 released at an opportune time for Paradox. Crusader Kings 2 launched only 1 year earlier, undeniably breaking new ground for the company and being the first game in Paradox history to become something of a mainstream phenomenon. But instead of taking place during the medieval era, Europa Universalis starts basically right around when CK2 ends, in 1444. This is a different world than 1066, or should I say 867. In 1444, Europe is at its most powerful in centuries, having recently reconquered most of the Iberian Peninsula from the Moops far to the west. But in the east, a near unstoppable force is about to descend on the continent, with the Ottomans soon to be conquering the last vestige of the old Byzantine Empire and jewel of the world, Constantinople. But saying that Europe is at its most powerful doesn't necessarily mean much. France is on the offense and eager to reclaim the lands held by England, but must contend with a powerful Burgundian force at its borders. In Italy, tiny merchant republics have an opportunity for glory, but must rely on powerful allies to achieve it. In Russia, Muscovy is eyeing an opportunity for lightning expansion by subjugating its tiny neighbors. And in Central Europe, the Holy Roman Empire is a patchwork of duchies and princedoms held together by a weak emperor. But perhaps Europe's only union can come together in time, combining its armies and economies to create a Reich of unparalleled might. And then we have the North, where Norway and Sweden are vassals of Denmark in a relationship which most likely will sour fairly soon. This is Europe in 1444, and it is indeed the place to be. But seeing as this is a Paradox game, it's not the only place to be. In the Middle East, Egypt, Turkic, and Persian kingdoms vie for power, while in the Far East, Ming enjoys its vast dominion as hegemon of China, for now. In India, various princes and kings vie for power of the subcontinent, and just across the narrow sea, the Japanese clans are warring over the shogunate, but perhaps one clan may rise above the others and claim dominion over the entire island one day. In Africa, the different kingdoms and tribes have but a few centuries to prepare for the coming foreign invasions, but shrewd development and unifications might just do the trick if new technology can be learned in time. And in the Americas, the Aztecs and countless other factions stand in a similar position, but perhaps a grim future can be turned on its head, invading lions becoming frightened cats instead. It is a time of faith, a time of kings. Oh, never mind, that's another game. So, this is the state of the world in 1444. No state is yet powerful enough to dominate the world. Not even the largest of powers can hope to topple a pack of starving wolves at the wrong time. But with time and dedication, empires will rise, others fall, and perhaps you'll even make it to the end date without being in crippling debt. And so we've made it this far without saying the magic words. So I guess it's time. Europa Universalis 4 is a real-time strategy game a la Paradox Development Studios. This means that the entire game is played in real time, day by day, and even though it's possible to pause the game and make decisions without the days moving by, every other state and faction are doing the same. This stands in stark contrast to turn-based games, where every faction takes their turn one at a time. This tiny fact creates an extremely active game where anything may happen at any time, taking you completely by surprise if you're not paying attention. The only downside to Paradox's massively deep games is the fact that there are no real-time tactical battles like in Total War, but what it lacks in cinematic action, it more than makes up for in strategic bonbons and extremely satisfying diplomatic and empire-building mechanics. And oh boy, I guess we're starting this journey too now. The question is, where to even begin? There are so many main concepts in EU4 that it's truly hard to know where to start, but I guess we'll begin at the state level, or a bit more meta than that, what kind of states exist in EU4? In many strategy games, factions will be cosmetically different, but the actual gameplay, the way states are managed, won't be that different at all. In Total War Shogun 2, every faction basically plays the same, save for starting locations and certain units. In Medieval 2, every faction literally plays the same, only some of the factions belong to different religions and some have access to the Pope mechanic. In Europa Universalis, however, every state belongs to not only different religions and cultures with their own modifiers, but they swear to one of many regime types and administrations. In Europe alone, government types vary from kingdoms, princedoms, duchies, monastic orders, republics, and further away we have daimyos, shogunates, and many more. There are essentially 5 big government types, and these are monarchies, republics, theocracies, tribal governments, and native tribes. In addition, there are government ranks, which are based on the size and power of the state in question. There are exactly 3 government ranks, beginning at the duchy rank for the smallest states, moving up to kingdom size for the most powerful, and the empire rank for only the most glorious of hegemons. To tell you how rare empires are, for example, the starting date only features 4 titular empires, namely Ming, Byzantium, the Timurids, and Ethiopia, the latter 3 funnily enough being located relatively close to each other. Of course, I say titular here, because in 1444, Byzantium is an empire in all but name, but at the end of the day, isn't name all that matters? So what does all this jargon stuff mean in practice? Well, if you're a European monarchy, chances are you can join in the most fun game of all, the game of love. And by the game of love, I mean that game where you marry off your children in order to forge alliances and good relations with other factions. What's more, if you've played the royal game really well, or you're just insanely lucky, you may get the opportunity to inherit entire countries in one fell sweep, becoming the dominating partner in a royal union between 2 or more states. This means that you can essentially contest your right to inherit foreign thrones, potentially throwing the continent into massive succession wars like the ones that indeed happen in our own history. If you know or remember Crusader Kings 2 and 3, in those games, royal marriages are essentially half the game because they're so important in creating new characters and heirs with rights and claims to various titles. In this sense, royal marriages aren't as crucial in EU4, but that doesn't mean they're not important. You see, marriages not only improve relations between factions, but they tie their ruling families together by default, at least for the duration of the royal couple's lifetime. A marriage creates a non-aggression pact between the parties, meaning that if you wish to declare war on the other, you'll now lose insane amounts of stability and have worse off relations with every kingdom you have a royal marriage with. In many ways then, royal marriages is an easy and efficient way to secure yourself from immediate wars, especially since breaking royal marriages, which yes is a possibility, will cost you in hits to stability and war exhaustion, both of which will make it harder to maintain the security and strength of your realm. Marriages can therefore, due to the relations improvement, also be the first step to an alliance or indeed to an overlordship relationship by virtue of vassalization alone, and not inheritance, since vassalization requires for the most part only very high relations and the acceptance of the lower party. Monarchs have a legitimacy rating which affects the stability and indeed legitimacy of your ruling monarch, which in turn decides how other rulers see you, how willing your soldiers are to fight for you, or how loyal your population is. You know, if they want to revolt and overthrow you or not. The legitimacy also factors into how likely you are to actually become the leading partner in a royal union. So there's a whole lot to think about. Royal marriages also factors in here, because even though it'll cost you a few points to tie the knot, you'll gain more legitimacy faster over time, meaning for all intents and purposes, and with some cunning planning, royal marriages is a good medium to long-term investment. It used to be, however, that royal marriages was the only way to either ruling or inheriting other nations through a personal union. But these days, there are so many other ways to get there. For example, many kingdoms and nations now have unique missions that, when accomplished, automatically creates personal unions for you, making it an easier task in certain circumstances. That doesn't at all mean that organic royal marriages and personal unions are useless or even worth less today, only that there are other ways to get there for some, and I personally really like that. Closely linked with, but a sole feature on its own, is stability, and this might just be the single most important feature in EU4, depending on how you look at it. You see, stability represents the stability of your realm, the Doi, and has wide-ranging consequences for every single ruler. Positive stability affects everything from foreign spy detection to global trade power and even missionary strength. But most of all, it increases your national tax revenue and your national unrest suppression, making it less likely that revolts and rebellions occur. On the flip side, negative stability will decrease your tax income, your legitimacy, and even interest per annum, making for much more expensive loans. But most of all, it now increases national unrest. This in particular is a massive deal, since perhaps even more so than foreign powers, EU4 sees you deal with internal problems, and local rebels, pretenders to the throne, or religious and cultural fanatics will threaten to derail your empire's plans if left to their devices. Keeping your stability high is therefore paramount to a growing and prosperous kingdom, but challenges to your stability will constantly arise. Events that lower stability, monarchs that suddenly die and send turbulence through the realm, whatever it is, despite being partially RNG based, EU4 seems to know exactly when to hurt and when to help you. And the paradox is of course that when it rains, it pours. Hard times often create even harder times, making it all the more satisfying to get out of those holes and claw yourself back into the light. However, good times may also lead to hard ones, because even though stability affects almost every part of the game, so too do other parts affect stability, or rather, national unrest. Conquest is a major part of EU4, and if there's one thing we're just not getting away from, it's how every EU4 player's dream is to spread those colors and keep on spreading them. More of me, as they say. But the thing is, EU4's way of telling you to slow down a bit is mainly through overextension, because you know, conquering settlements never was just simple as. If you do not have a core on a foreign province, meaning that your people also inherently see it as theirs, then overextension will occur. Now this might threaten to spawn a few local rebels, but minor points of overextension isn't really a problem in itself. The problem is when you conquer several high-value provinces at the same time, and when overextension percentage begins to tick to over 40, over 70, or even over 100%. That's when even the most powerful empires on Earth will start to seriously feel the heat, especially if you're also fighting wars or dealing with other issues at the same time. If you additionally find yourself ruling a multicultural, multi-religious empire with several competing groups, you'll suddenly experience the wrath of EU4. So in other words, overextension is paramount to pay attention to and to never feel overconfident with. Yes, I too know the meme overextension is just a number, and it's funny, but it's also the farthest thing from the truth. That being said, it's a great mechanic that plays an important balancing role, both able to halt the advance of large empires to prevent immediate and constant blobbing, and since it's possible to mitigate overextension by coring new provinces to integrate them properly by using monarch points, it will also force you to decide where to spend those precious points, our next feature. Oh my god, Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, I can't believe how much there is to think about in this game. Everything is connected, but it's so good, I'm not complaining. Every monarch lends the nation so-called monarch points, which are these sort of magical values that determine almost everything surrounding progress in the game. You develop your nation, execute missions, counter inflation, stamp down revolts, and vitally develop new technology entirely based on monarch points. So how smart or capable your monarch is at any point can determine a whole lot for the future of your kingdom. The worst a monarch can be is literally doing nothing by giving you 0 points in either point group, or giving a maximum of 6, which is genius status. It is therefore incredibly empowering when your monarch is such a genius, and something of a doomsday scenario when they're closer to the bottom of the scale, as they will probably remain monarch for around 30 to 60 years depending on when they became ruler, and if you want them to abdicate or somehow have them killed. Of course, having them abdicate does cost a ton of legitimacy, and when your ruler dies, you of course lose stability. However, every state in the game receives a base value of 3 monarch points in every category, so if everything remains equal, you won't stand still necessarily. Sadly, nothing is ever equal in EU4. have a few more diplomatic relations than you can comfortably maintain, say goodbye to one diplomatic monarch power per overextended relation. Want to focus on one monarch power over the other? Say bye to 1 point in the other 2 categories. Got some bad event or a series of them? Yeah, you might just have to pay them off with monarch power, representing your state and monarch's influence to fix stuff internally in your realm. One surefire, although relatively expensive way to get monarch points and perhaps even save a campaign is by way of advisors, which really do make a difference. Advisors serve your court in the various branches of government and also provide bonuses related to those branches. Knowing when to hire one or indeed upgrade one is paramount, as the cost of say a level 2 over a level 1 advisor or indeed a level 3 over level 2 experiences stark increases for every level. In other words, if you're smart, advisor can save you and mitigate negatives elsewhere. If not, they may bankrupt you in a matter of months. You can also gain monarch power from events, of course, which always makes for happy days, but the default way of getting them is always through your monarch. This is one of the downsides of a monarchy, haha, that your heir is more or less randomized, and you'd be lucky to receive a genius who gives a maximum of 6 power in each category. To compare rulers in the early game, for example, Paradox simulates historical situations by giving England a deadbeat monarch, King Henry VI Lancaster a total of 0 points in each category, while the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II 6, 4, and 6, and suddenly you can see one explanation as to why England is due for some heavy few upcoming years, and the opposite goes for not just the Ottoman, but the Otto women and the Otto children as well. However, this system of monarchical rulers does not apply to non-monarchies, which is also where EU4 provides even more diversity in experience and unique gameplay mechanics. Republics, naturally, cannot marry their children off to others, since they don't have any royal babies, and so do not really partake in this royal pyramid scheme. But not all republics are the same. Some are merchant republics like Venice, other are Italian signorias like Florence, but what they have in common is the fact that they both need to adhere to the republican tradition mechanic if they want to remain republics. Depending on how you want your republics to evolve, you can often choose your next leader's capability in an election based on whether you want to develop your nation's military, administrative, or diplomatic powers. And you can even choose to support varying factions in your republic, again depending on what you wish to focus on, like the navy or the army. Here, monarch points factor in once again, but this time you can actually choose the skill of your leader. The only catch is that they will be really good in one area, for example giving you 4 administrative points per month, while only giving you 1 point in the other 2. However, if you want to jeopardize your republic by doing a little trolling and electing the same guy time after time, you actually get the benefit of increasing the leader's skill by 1 point in one area every time, potentially giving you a genius ruler at the cost of republican tradition. Of course, there are differences between republicans and other government forms, which is where the relatively recent government reforms come in. You see, Florence is also a republic, but thanks to the state's power structure, namely the Italian Signoria reform, which allows royal marriages while being a republic. It does more too, allowing the ruler to sit for 12 years and increases national tax modifier by 15%, which is a significant amount. On the other hand, Venice has its very own government type, only allowing changing rulers when the last one dies, and holds elections by lottery, not actual elections. Venice also has the Council of 10 mechanic, where you can spend various powers to, for example, decrease the power of the different guilds in relation to the state's own authority. This Venetian overhaul in particular was part of one of the latest overhauls to EU4, Winds of Change, which saw a deepening of several different states around the world. Venice has always been a cool faction due to its positioning and republican status, but has now been made even deeper, and I for one am all for it. There are changes like these, not just differences between governments, but differences even between governments within the same government type that makes EU4 so special. And really, it has become something of a grand strategy player's dream. I mean, these reforms go even further. With enough government experience points, you can further tailor your state's building blocks to your own tastes, moving through the ages by making it more pluralistic or more aristocratic, more religious or more focused on warfare, and so on and so forth, allowing you to create centralized trading empires or cultural behemoths. And while we do find mostly generic reforms that are open to everyone, some, like Venice in this example, have entirely unique reforms too, making it an even deeper and more fun system to play around with, making each playthrough different literally every time. Government types also governs part of your relationship with other states, increasing or decreasing your relationship status based on your respective systems of government, and your options to increase or decrease it. Then we have tribal governments, often used by factions on the outskirts of more centralized states. Often nomadic to begin with, meaning that they're not really locked to the same provinces as proper feudal states are. Native American tribal governments are quite different from the Cossack tribal government, often in how their legitimacy is presented or which events that happen and allow for further development of the faction. Lastly, native tribes use neither legitimacy nor republican tradition as mechanics, and every time a ruler dies, a new one is randomly generated, meaning there is no true consistency or reliability in what you get. But even here, unique government reforms await that are totally different from those of monarchies and the like elsewhere, like Mohawk's clan council, which provides a third diplomat. Now, these are some of the most common forms of government, but as stated, there are more out there just waiting for you to explore them. Depending on your culture and location, you can even get unique events, making for a truly flavorful experience. For example, Byzantium unlocks unique faction events to reconquer the empire if they can survive that long, and as the shogunate, several events involving the development of Japan or peacemaking between its warring factions impact your game state, often even allowing you to choose a path, sometimes offering you gold and glitter, other times misery and sided comets. What's gotten so much better in EU4 are exactly those types of moment-to-moment events that are often even historically inspired. Using Byzantium again as an example, it's fascinating to see that when the stars align, that you actually receive aid from European mercenaries, which you would in real life. Even though, of course, it might all add up to naught in the end. But the fact that the events are there, that there are so many of them, it's great, and it's a part of EU4 that will continue to astonish even 100, 1000, even 2000 or more plus hours into the game, as it has done for me. What's really funny though, is when a government is part of a completely different type of government or polity or community still. This is for example the case for the members of the Holy Roman Empire. Here, each member is a kind of subject of the emperor, who can be chosen by a number of electors every time the former emperor dies. But they're not truly subjects either, because the emperor doesn't have sway over their personal diplomacy, for example, at least not in the beginning. And it's not only the emperor who gets bonuses from partaking in the empire. Depending on the state of it all, meaning how many imperial edicts the emperor has managed to issue, each member receives various bonuses to different parts of their state. At the same time, the emperor is obligated to protect each member state of the empire, meaning that if a foreign power decides to try to invade an imperial province, the emperor and their allies will likely come to their aid, making a foreign attack on the empire a highly dangerous situation. In fact, this is an incredibly important part of the job of being emperor. Taking back imperial provinces or successfully defending member states' lands may gain you imperial authority, which is crucial when it comes to actually progressing here. You see, imperial authority is what allows you to enact reforms within the empire, and is a completely unique mechanic for the HRE. More than just managing your own government, the emperor can here change the course of history by slowly developing this grander project over the course of decades and centuries, ultimately turning it into a unified federation with one head, or alternatively, a fully operational and centralized empire under one banner as intended by God himself. Of course, it's even possible to have the empire dismantled by a hostile power, all of which create amazing what-if scenarios in every playthrough. Most of the same goes for the system in China, where there is one hegemon ruling over the other member states. This is also a decentralized system, but one much more focused on money, because members of this Chinese empire are effectively tributaries of the emperor, providing gold each month to the ruling faction. I also especially love the little golden icons down on the right side of the screen. It's just so much nice immersion, exactly what I played this game for. But friends, there's more to this game than governments. There's also religion. We might not be in the early medieval times anymore, but it will be quite a stretch to say that religion is anything less of a factor. This is after all the era of the religious 30 Years' War. Religion in EU4 serves almost the same role as governments more or less, but in different aspects of the game. For example, monarchs cannot enter royal marriages with factions from other religions, and they will like factions from other religions less purely based on that fact. Catholic countries must adhere to the Pope and the College of Cardinals, which they can use the papal influence power points to nudge one way or the other. Accumulating enough papal points even allows you to increase the stability or tax income of your kingdom for a duration, and can therefore be extremely useful at the right time. If a crusade is called, which yes, there are crusades in this game for about the first half of it, every Catholic nation fighting the faction in question will also get a huge boost in morale and attack power while fighting said faction. So remaining loyal to the Pope is not necessarily a bad thing, even though if you are on bad terms for one reason or another, he might just decide to excommunicate you, meaning that other Catholic nations may wage war on you in the name of the Lord. Of course, this changes completely once you belong to any of the other branches of Christianity, be it Protestantism, which develops later on, or Orthodoxy, present in much of Eastern Europe. Each of these latter two are much more independent and free-moving, allowing each of these to choose mechanisms which pushes their factions toward whatever goal they want. Protestants can, for example, enact church edicts, which increases their settler increase in the colonies, tax income, or production values, while Orthodoxy, which is also rather independent, is honestly extremely cool. The reason why I think Orthodoxy is especially cool is because of the two mechanics related to the Patriarch Authority and icons. The deal with patriarchal authority is that actions you execute and decisions you make influences its value, for example giving you a boost to missionary strength or decreases your local unrest. The fun part is that every patriarch authority is linked to each individual country, so one nation's authority does not affect another's. Then we have icons, which are more like massive focuses you decide to enact for a longer period of time, and they can greatly aid you with construction costs, civil unrest, or relations with other factions. And believe me, you'll need it. But I also enjoy how the Catholic community has evolved over the years. Using papal influence, which is gained from controlling cardinals and from being on good terms with the papacy, allows you to not just invest points into increasing the chance of having your cardinal elected pope, but it lets you invoke some powerful papal abilities too. Gaining papal influence happens over the course of years, so being able to utilize these abilities will normally only happen every so often. You can tell they're powerful. Spending 50 papal influence can net you things like a major tax increase over a few years, increase morale of armies, lessen debt burdens and so on, or even by spending 100 points, you can increase the ability by 1. However, as mentioned before, if there is one thing religion is not in EU for, it is static, and there is so much more to the religious scene than what's here on Take 1. You see, as Catholic nations, you get to deal with a tiny little cute number called Reform Desire. Oh, it's nothing special, nothing fancy, you know, it's just the one modifier that indicates when you might be getting close to a freaking earth-shatteringly devastating war that will kill hundreds of thousands if not millions of people. Because yes, even though it's not there at the start, Protestantism and various other Christian branches can and will pop up after about 100 or more years into the game. Reform desire will increase with time due to corruption within the church and corruption committed by Christian kings, and will almost inevitably lead to a guy nailing about 95 theses to a church door. Protestantism will soon spread across the continent, partially randomly, almost most of the time following historical paths, although you can, if you wish, convert on your own account, although dealing with massive religious unrest in the process. Religious unrest there will almost always be anyway though, and you know things are dark when official religious leagues are formed, with the Holy Roman Emperor on the one side representing Catholicism, and the strongest Protestant nation representing them. What's awesome in the later years is that before the religious wars truly begin, Catholic nations can come together at various councils to try to mitigate the complaints from the Protestants, giving themselves various bonuses in this time. But in about 90% of cases or more, unless the emperor never declares war on the Protestants or if Protestantism never takes hold, which is very rare, the 30 Years' War will happen, and it will include anyone who wants to join in. Meaning most of the time, the wars will include massive kingdoms and empires like France, the Ottomans, and Russia, and just where these three chips fall in particular will be paramount to which side ends up winning. This war is one of the largest in any playthrough, and even though it will not necessarily change any borders right away, it will change the course of history by either enabling Protestantism to flourish within the Holy Roman Empire or crush it forever. Islamic countries are not as unified, and that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting here as the Catholic countries, but in return, they do get to personalize their faith a lot more. Every Muslim nation can choose which branch of Islam it wishes to follow, going even deeper than the traditional Sunni and Shia divide by having you choose between varying branches even within the two of them, giving you bonuses to your nation depending on your situation and what you choose. There are many other belief systems out there, like the Japanese Shinto religion or more spiritually centric ones, and they all have their own unique systems, which makes for vastly different experiences depending on who you're playing as. And with that, we're moving on to the mission system. You see, EU4 is clearly a massive, ginormous, all-encompassing game. You're basically free to do whatever you want, and never have to ever follow or maintain a predetermined path. In fact, that's how people played virtually every Paradox game until EU4's fateful expansion. Or Hearts of Iron 4, I guess. But in a game this vast, it certainly helps to have some leads, or at least the option of direction. And this is where the mission trees come in. Mission trees actually came quite late in the game, as late as 2018 in fact, but completely changed how EU4 is approached. Essentially, every major nation, and by now so many others and certain lucky ones, have unique mission trees tailored specifically to that nation. Think of them as focus trees in Hearts of Iron 4, only not as necessary or integral, but still absolutely awesome and so much fun. The missions are essentially opportunities for the player to be rewarded for their actions, and as a rule, they more or less follow each nation's historical path to victory, but often even go much further than that, or indeed create alternate paths to follow, especially for those nations who never made it quite that big. They can give you much needed stability, monarch points or other bonuses, but the most important ones deal with conquering other nations or even vassalizing them, or opening opportunities you might not have encountered without them, or at least nowhere near as easily. For this fact, I love the mission trees of countries like Austria and France the most, as they deal with the heart of Europe, but the intricacy and unique tailoring goes for all nations with these trees. Some are even hugely important, especially if we're talking about relatively minor nations, because they really give them a boost to unique paths and ways to take off. It's also a big plus that the artwork for each and every one is so superbly made and really blends well with the rest of the UI. Now here's something I really have to ask. Back in December of 2021, I made my first EU4 review, this video being a much deeper version of that initial video. But back then, I pleaded for Paradox to make an updated mission tree for Norway and the Scandinavian factions. Remember, this was late 2021, I called that potential expansion Line of the North.
Oh, and Paradox desperately need to give us a Line of the North immersion pack with an updated mission tree for Norway. Snälla och tusen tack.
Did Paradox watch my review? Had they already announced it at this point? And I subconsciously took the name? I don't think so. So since the announcement trailer was posted on August 25th, 2022, almost 8 months to the day after my review was published, and guess what that DLC was called? Lines of the North. In other words, I need Paradox to comment on this video and let me know how much they love me and how much they see me and how much they listen to me. Snälla och tusen tack. I think in terms of post-release mechanics and DLCs, this mission tree system, which has now been slowly implemented over the course of the past 6 years, which, wow, is just a bit more than half the lifetime of this game, is the best change to EU4 in all its years. I just love it so much, and I think it's because I love being able to more or less follow historical trajectories if I want to, or take alternative yet lightly scripted paths if I manage to do so, and I'm really happy with this change, which now has become integral to my EU4 experience. But what's even better is that in the later years, Paradox Tinto began expanding new and former mission trees to be so much deeper than they used to. Not only did they add more missions, but they implemented branching paths, creating wildly different kingdoms and scenarios depending on which you choose. Even though the mission tree system was great at implementation, it's since been perfected then, and has so far, and let's face it, for all intents and purposes finally become as great as it will ever be. In other game-changing, structure-making mechanics, we have the institutions and ages system. As you might know, EU4 takes place over the span of about 400 years. Without anything to compartmentalize this, the game becomes something of a long line of war and peace. But include it, and we have a game with some very much needed and definable time periods. Each age lasts for 90 years and represents the 4 different time periods of the game. And each of them allows you to unlock certain modifiers unique to that age, and specific factions that historically had an edge during the selected periods can unlock powers which really reveal their potential. Thing is, alongside those starting position monarchs, these special age abilities is another feature that set factions apart. Like again with the Ottomans, where unlocking their age ability nets them a massive boon to siege ability, which helps them greatly with fast conquest in this early era. If you unlock enough age bonuses, you can even spawn a golden age that will last you 50 years, but only once, so make sure you know when you would benefit the most from one. Now for every age, there are about 2 so-called institutions, meaning there are 8 in total. Institutions spawn about every 50 years and are basically ways for the game to tell you that new ideas are in motion. Examples of institutions are the Renaissance, the printing press, and the Enlightenment, and they can bring some massive benefits with time. Here's the kicker though, institutions spawn based on provinces in the game meeting certain modifiers, meaning that it's possible to kind of prepare and attempt to have as many institutions spawn within your realm as possible. This is a massive bonus to your nation, since in order to actually embrace an institution nationally, you need to have enough provinces in your realm having already embraced it, and at least 10% if you want to cash out and spend a large lump sum for that institution. but doing so grants you potential prestige and monarch points and allows you to stay ahead in the innovation game, which impacts the next section we're diving into. Little in EU4 can be done without its technology and idea system, which, much like the rest of the mechanics, impacts almost everything you do. Do you see how intertwined this game is with itself? I swear this must have taken ages to develop, like 11 years and then some to say the least. Anyway, technology is divided into 3 sections: administrative, diplomatic, and military. These unsurprisingly correspond with the same type of monarch points, and in EU4, the technology race is real. The reason why it's so important is partially because this is where you upgrade your army level, and better soldiers and cannons will, if a few levels higher, absolutely slaughter the outdated ones. In the same vein, administrative points will open up the opportunity to build important buildings, and diplomatic tech will increase your naval and colonial range, all very important things. However, the administrative tech is also especially vital because if you level it enough, you get to open your new idea groups. This is where your nation can truly set itself apart, and where you're able to specialize in various fields of state depending on your playstyle. Want to create a colonial empire? Or what about a trade one? Or a combination? You'll need a powerful navy for sure, or maybe a land empire is better, with a powerful army that goes beyond anything else acquired by ordinary technology upgrades. Chances are you're going to focus on a bit of both, but it's completely up to you. And the feeling of rush when acquiring new much needed tech and ideas is next to none in this game. Everything is kinda ticking and increasing somewhere, even if it's just your debt. But hopefully it's not your debt. To dive a bit deeper into the various systems though, let's begin with the military side of things. Because thing is, EU4's warfare system is complicated to say the least. On the surface though, it's relatively basic. You recruit units one by one, whether land or naval, and they show up on the map when they're ready. However, not so fast. You see, while EU4 has no population mechanic per se, it does have an army and navy manpower modifier, meaning that we are essentially simulating a recruitable and draftable population. Since each unit of soldiers requires 1,000 of the relevant manpower, you'll quickly understand how many units you can theoretically support at any given time. And yes, this means that you cannot physically recruit more national soldiers than you can support, which is a great mechanic. Thing is though, as you lose men in battle or to attrition, these men will need to be replenished, and they come from the same manpower pool. In other words, simply having your units be replenished can be as expensive in terms of manpower and money as recruiting more men, but in the end, they will all add up to the same number of course. However, not all armies are built equally. In fact, they literally never are. Generals leading armies is not just a vital thing to have, but each general have their own strengths in terms of offensive, defensive, and siege ability, which drastically changes the capabilities of the armies they lead. More than that, as the game progresses, you also unlock new types of units within each branch, like infantry, skirmish, and cavalry units, but you even unlock mighty cannons, which leads into a whole new level of technological hot and cold wars. You see, technology and ideas are vital, absolutely crucial when it comes to dishing out damage and being able to take it. The great military techs will take you great leaps forward and are important to keep up with, but the specialization and distinctions come within the idea groups, where you can focus on having smaller but better armies, larger ones with more morale, better generals, better offensive or defensive stats, and so on and so forth. In essence, a faction that's focused on at least one or two military ideas through the past 200 years will most likely completely annihilate a faction that has not. A fact I've burnt myself on several times, especially in my first few years of playing this game, which now is a long time ago admittedly. Another major factor is army professionalism, meaning how well trained your army is. New recruits will always be untrained, but the more your army fights over time, or the more they train during peacetime, the better it will be. This factors in two places actually, namely in the overall army tradition of your nation, which positively impacts everyone, and the individual experience of each and every unit. All else being equal, a more professional army will trump a noob army, and will often have a good edge against larger armies as well. Of course, terrain and movements such as river crossings also have a say. Even the army composition factors in, meaning things like how large the various sections of your army is, compared to the sections of the enemy, will have great impact. There are so many points in the game where both numbers and quality will vary in importance, and again, all depending on how you have led your nation. All in all, while it visually remains quite basic, the systems behind the warfare have definitely stood the test of time. And the same goes for the navy basically. Another major part of EU4 that ties into idea groups is the colonization system, an absolute juggernaut of an EU aspect. This game begins at the cusp of the age of colonial empires after all, and even though the European powers in particular begin isolated from much of the rest of the world, this will not be the case for long. The main latent factor that determines your ability to go out into the world and actually colonize, however, is colonial range. As you increase your tech, your colonial range increases, meaning that you can colonize lands further and further away. However, the must-have when it comes to colonizing is first putting a ton of diplomatic power into diplomatic tech, and when the time comes, unlocking exploration ideas, because this allows you to recruit conquistadors and naval explorers. You see, you can't colonize what you cannot see, and explorers, much like Columbus of the past, is what allows you to reach out and find uncharted waters and land. Afterwards, unlocking literal colonists is what you need, because they are what establishes your colonies. A native policy is now needed, and you get to decide whether to live in peace with, establish trade connections, or pursue a violent policy, each with their own up and downsides. You'll find that colonizing takes a lot of time, especially with just one colonist, which you can luckily increase with other ideas. But when you factor in that nations like England, France, Spain, and Portugal, oftentimes followed by the Netherlands and perhaps even Denmark, pursue this policy, after a few decades and certainly after 2-3 centuries, large colonies will have been established, potentially vastly increasing the power and wealth of each one. On the flip side, colonies in places like the Americas will soon become entities of their own. Colonies still, but actually their own nations. If they grow too strong or become unruly, which large ones will do, you might suddenly find yourself fighting your once loyal subjects, and may see yourself lose a ton of colonial lands at once. In other words, while playing the colonial game is vital to contend with other major powers, especially if you border the Atlantic, you must be aware of both native tribes, uprisings, other power-hungry colonial powers, or indeed the colonies you yourself establish, which creates a truly great sense of risk-reward gameplay, and not just in the short term, but in both the short, medium, and long term. Another vital aspect of EU4, now one much more internally powerful, is the estate mechanic, which is also one of my favorite systems that came after release. Essentially, estates make up a big chunk of your internal politics, as you'll have to balance the wishes of the nobility, bourgeoisie, and the clergy depending on where you are. All of these want as much power in the realm as possible, but of course, the crown needs to maintain some of its own. At any given time, the estates control a portion of your realm's lands, and you can allocate provinces to them, which will make them more or less loyal to you. You'll have to balance their power against their loyalty, and each of these will contribute towards vital positive or negative factors which can spell glory or doom for your nation. The reason why I love it so much is because it really does add a lot of gameplay and complexity to EU4's peacetime sessions in particular, which you'll probably have a lot of. It's also not that complicated of a mechanic on its own, and a unique map mode makes it easier to see which estate owns what. However, even this mechanic has been severely fleshed out since launch. Each estate has a number of privileges they can be given which suit their position. The reason why you want to give them privileges is because it usually increases their loyalty or influence, allowing them to accomplish more on your behalf. The reason you don't want to is also because they often increase their influence or indeed take away your own, and if you find yourself in a position where their influence is high but their loyalty is low, that can spell serious difficulties in the short to medium term. Unruly and powerful estates will threaten the stability of your realm, even to the point where they can coup the nation. In many cases, estates begin with no privileges at all, allowing you to fully tailor them, as long as they exist in your nation, of course, which they for the most part only do in monarchies. But in certain cases, like in that of Byzantium, the estates will in particular pose a massive challenge, since they have a ton of power or cling to vital privileges you often don't want them to keep having. Questions will often arise then, concerning which privileges you can give, and other times, which you can afford to remove. But if you've done well and been smart, you may have your estates be so loyal to you that you get to claim more royal lands for your own, increasing your power relative to them. A monarch with more crown land will also be internally more powerful. And even though you technically could sell it off for a large sum of gold, I'd recommend trying to hold on and consolidate it, because the bonuses of holding a lot of it are powerful indeed. In essence then, the estate mechanic is a highly interesting and fun system that always runs in the background, but which is important to maintain and pay attention to nonetheless. One last aspect has to be mentioned, and even though I have a ton of favorites, this might just be the major one: the music. Odds are there is no soundtrack or piece of music I have listened to more than Andreas Valdetoft's and co.'s tunes, and I would have felt bad if it wasn't for the tiny fact that they're all fantastic. EU4 offers a god-tier soundtrack straight up, and a soundtrack which has expanded drastically in the past 11 years. The original tracks do hold a special place in my heart, but some of them stand out in particular, and if you'll stick with me for just around 30 seconds per song, even though they're often best played in full since these are actual long songs, not just jingles, I'd love to give you some snippets, like the ever-classic Aire, discovery, land in sight, open seas, and of course, the sound of summer. Honestly, there are so many I could pick, and this is just a few among the original tracks that came with the game all those years ago. But I think you can tell that all of them mostly convey the same themes: a sense of discovery, of new horizons, of potential and wide open seas. They're melancholic and hopeful at the same time, yearning for what's out there. Now, what I showed you thus far were mostly peaceful songs, and there are indeed more fighting ready ones on the original soundtrack as well. But I find that the DLC tracks do at times have a lot more punch to them, which is why we're turning to them now. And it begins virtually instantly with the tracks added over a decade ago, with the likes of the Grand Armada, Piper Lead Your Clansmen, and Birth of a Global Empire. Notice how these are a bit more energetic, a bit more out there with the power and the glory. But these are still often peacetime soundtracks, believe it or not, and I love them for it. But if you want some real action, well, EU4 got you more covered than most, because this is pure warfare bliss, and we begin with an empire divided. Duality of faith, discoveries revealed, American soil, battles on Persian borders, moment of truth, and last but certainly not least, Last Man Standing, which I'll let play just a bit longer to mark the end of this triumphant musical journey. These are masterpieces one and all, and have sent shivers down my spine and the semblance of tears in my eyes hundreds if not thousands of times. EU4's music goes from being solemn, comfortable and hopeful to downright portraying the sounds of glory, fear and the true meaning of awesomeness, and I'll forever be in Valdertoft and Company's debt for their creations. Recently, composer studio Utopia has also graced the EU4 scene with new themes, and even though I have yet to hear all of them or have nearly as much experience with them, they're also great additions, if not lacking a bit in that original EU4 soundscape, yet still bringing its own spin on things. Nevertheless, if you'll indulge me once more, tunes like Into the Beyond, A Brief History of Everything, and Back to the Motherland. These are all fantastic. But of course, no EU4 track beats the one and only Christmas edition, which is just the best thing about EU4 and plays only during December, songs of Yuletide. As you can tell, EU4 is indeed a leviathan of a game that's brought domination to the strategy genre with its winds of change, whose origins hailed from a time way back, but who brought forth the Lions of the North and became the King of Kings who awoke the Rus, became the Emperor who ruled Britannia, and brought about the Third Rome with the mandate of heaven. If you know, you know. To put it all together like this is a challenge, and there are absolutely aspects I haven't mentioned or focused as much on, which can also be owed to me having less experience with those systems, like for example playing native tribes in the Americas, African factions, or some of the Middle Eastern ones, all of which have had several flavor updates in the past years, and which have made the game a lot more well-rounded. At this point, there is no continent that hasn't been upgraded in a ton of ways, and in many regards, EU4 is probably the most fleshed out of any Paradox game ever. It's fascinating to think about just how much complexity there is to deal with here. Europa Universalis 4 takes us on a journey from the early modern period to the Napoleonic Wars, almost 400 years of globe-spanning alternate history action. Whether you're playing as a smaller nation or a massive powerhouse, and no matter where you're located, you'll deal with unique challenges and possibilities. Covering the map in your own color or those of your vassals is up to you, and whether to become a big blue blob or a trade empire, or creating alternate powers in the Far East, Middle East, or the Far West, EU4 lets you do it. It's a game of groundbreaking twists and turns, whether that be in the stability disaster of a peasant revolt, of a royal marriage that turns a regional power into a contender for world hegemony, or in massive religious or revolutionary wars that have the capability of leveling nations and raising up others. You can indeed restore the Eastern Roman Empire, conquer the world as the kingdom of God, turn back the tide of the Ottomans as the Mamluks of Egypt, fight back against the colonizers in America, or follow history more closely. And I'm saying more because the mostly really good AI will make sure history is not followed fully as they aim to ally or stop you and each other at every turn. If it's not clear yet, I love EU4. As I should, with my over 2,000 hours and all. All of the reasons mentioned come together in a game that, even though it sometimes can feel unforgiving and sometimes suffers a bit from performance issues when the going gets tough in the late game, never stays down. It's not just a great strategy game, but it's probably the best strategy game in the history of strategy games based on its sheer depth, its scope, its endless possibilities, masterfully composed music, and variety and diversity in gameplay options. EU4 has been out for 11 years, and in that time, it's changed massively. In 2013, there was no state mechanic, no mission trees, no trade leagues, no hegemon mechanic, no deep Holy Roman Empire mechanic that lets you unify the empire or take it into a more decentralized direction, no deep Mandate of Heaven in China mechanic, no industrialization mechanics like the advent of coal and spinning jenny, no ages, no institutions, no innovation, and the list goes on. And those are just the large surface level mechanics. Remember that there's also a DLC subscription service now, so you don't even have to splurge to receive all the goodies available for this game. Put together, Europa Universalis 4 is a true masterpiece, a grand achievement unparalleled in the gaming industry. It offers so much diversity, so much depth and unforeseen consequence. It's a game about states and empires, but in reality, it's almost like its own little game of life. Things seem tougher in bad times, and suffering from low stability often means other bad things will pile on. The opposite is true in good times, but whether good or bad, you have to deal with whatever comes at you, and your decisions and a little luck will ultimately decide whether you come out on top or not. And while the UI might be a bit complicated for some, seeing as it came out before Paradox's UI design changes in Hearts of Iron and Crusader Kings 3, I actually prefer it, and I honestly love it for its complexity and stylish look. It will take some time to learn, but once you've reached that point, you'll never want to do anything else. I highly recommend Europa Universalis 4 all these years later, and congratulate Paradox for having made perhaps the most complete and all-encompassing strategy game of all time. Thank you so much for watching. EU4 is a massive game, and I try to put as many mechanics into this video as possible without making it incomprehensibly complex. Please let me know your thoughts on the video and on EU4 in the comments, and if you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out Instant Gaming by using my link below for the best gaming sales on new and older titles. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!